Hello and welcome to the wall of distrust. For more than 3 decades, ever since the victory of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the US government and mainstream Western media have been on a mission to instill in everyone's mind that Iranians are not to be trusted. US State Department official Wendy Sherman even went so far as to say deception is part of the Iranian DNA. Just think about that for a moment. She's saying that Iranians as a people are born to lie. I don't know about you, but I can't think of a more extreme or outrageous statement. And it came out of the mouth of a top US government official. But one question that rarely gets asked in the West is, why do Iranians not trust the US government? If you ask an ordinary Iranian on the street, they're ready with a long list of injustices they feel they've suffered at the hands of the US government. Ask the same question from an ordinary American on the street, and you're more likely to be met with a blank stare. We at Press TV Newsroom will try to answer this very valid question. Stay with us as we take a closer look at what some of the reasons are.
Iranians not trusting the United States is partly because of Washington's animosity toward the nation before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, especially the CIA coup in Iran in 1953 against the then popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was seeking to limit the control of Britain's Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or the AIOC, over Iranian petroleum reserves. On March 20, 1951, members of the Iranian parliament passed a bill introduced by Mossadegh to nationalize Iran's oil industry. The Prime Minister's decision was backed by his nationalist party as well as religious figures led by prominent cleric Ayatollah Abul Qasim Kashani. The initiative put an end to Britain's 4-decade-long rule over Iran's oil industry. The company had enjoyed monopolistic control over the nation's oil industry and used to pay only a small share of the revenues to the Iranian government. In retaliation to Mossadegh's revolutionary move, Britain and the United States imposed sanctions against Iran's oil industry and later staged a coup against the Prime Minister in 1953 in a bid to reinstate the Western-backed monarch Mohammad Reza Pahlavi after their efforts failed to bear results. 6 decades on, in 2013, the CIA published a document for the first time confirming Washington's role in the joint British-American overthrow of the Mossadegh administration in the 1953 coup. Here's a more in-depth look at the documents in a chronological order. March 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency begins drafting a plan to bring to power, through covert action, a government in Iran that would be preferred by the United States. April 16, 1953, a CIA study entitled Factors Involving the Overthrow of Mossadegh is completed. The study concludes that a coup in Iran is possible. May 13, 1953, the CIA and British intelligence officers meet in Nicosia, Cyprus to draft plans for the coup. Meanwhile, the CIA's Tehran station is granted approval to launch a grey propaganda campaign to discredit Mossadegh's government. August 4, 1953, Mossadegh, suspecting that British and American governments were plotting against him, holds a referendum calling for the Iranian parliament to be dissolved. August 13, 1953, the Shah signs a royal decree dismissing Mossadegh. Word of the Shah's support for the coup spreads quickly across the country. August 15, 1953, the coup begins but falters and then fails because Mossadegh received advance warning of the plans. August 16, 1953, the Shah flees to Baghdad. August 19, 1953, several Tehran newspapers published the Shah's decree. Thugs and ruffians paid to demonstrate take to the streets, and another coup begins. General Zahedi comes out of the hiding to lead the movement. By the end of the day, the country falls into Zahedi's hands, and members of the Mossadegh government either go to hiding or become incarcerated. The United States benefited from ousting Mossadegh and usurped a significant share of Iran's oil wealth following the notorious coup. The Shah's pro-Western dictatorship continued for 27 years and ended with the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which paved the way for today's Iran, where anti-American sentiment still remains strong. The 1953 coup continues to cast a long shadow over Iran-US relations.
But it wasn't just the 1953 coup. The US kept interfering with Iran's internal affairs 2 decades later, and right after the Islamic Revolution, Washington was caught spying on Iran using its embassy in Tehran for espionage.
The belief that the United States is an untrustworthy party in nuclear negotiations runs deep in contemporary history, being echoed from the streets to the very heart of the Iranian government. That's because the US has repeatedly plotted against the Persian country after the Islamic 1979 revolution. On November 4th, 1979, and in less than a year after the victory of the Islamic Revolution that toppled the US-backed monarchy, a group of Iranian university students took over the US embassy in Tehran. They believed the compound had been turned into a den of espionage that aimed to overthrow the Islamic Republic. As the students entered the building, the embassy staff started to shred documents in an attempt to hide the evidence of their spying activities. It was impossible to shred all documents, and what the Iranian students later pieced together exposed the US plots. Documents found at the compound corroborated claims that the US was using its Tehran embassy to plan to topple the new Islamic establishment in Iran. The students also discovered the names of Iranians, including some that had managed to penetrate the revolutionary circles, who were on the US payroll. They were working with the US to bring about a coup against the revolutionary government. Washington, to divert attention from the public, reported the incident as an act of barbarism, but gave no explanation on the documents found in his diplomatic mission. 52 American nationals from the embassy were held for 444 days until the 20th of January 1981. From the early days of the takeover, planning to release the hostages got underway. On the 24th of April 1980, Washington launched a covert military operation known as Operation Eagle Claw in an attempt to release former US embassy staff. However, a sandstorm hit and brought down the group of US military aircraft in the Tabas Desert, killing 8 American servicemen and resulting in the abortion of the mission. Inspections showed a helicopter crashed into a C-130 Hercules transport plane as 5 other choppers were stranded in the storm. The units involved in the operation were from the US Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. Iran commemorates the event every year as a symbol of the failure of US plots against the Islamic Republic.
As you saw in the report, the United States military operation failed in Tabas, and the US decided to intensify the pressure on Iran by imposing sanctions against the Iranian people.
The United States imposed sanctions against Iran following the victory of the Islamic Revolution in February 1979. Under the measures, the US restricted oil imports from Iran and froze some of its assets, including bank deposits, gold, and other properties. Iranian officials say billions of dollars of the country's assets remain frozen. Washington stepped up the sanctions against Tehran in the next decades. In 1995, the White House prohibited any US trade with Iran. US Congress passed an act that imposed economic sanctions on firms doing businesses with Iran. The act targeted both American and non-American companies and was extended until December 31st, 2011. Currently, the sanctions include an embargo on selling aircraft and repair parts to Iranian aviation companies. A large number of Iranians have lost their lives due to plane crashes blamed on technical faults. While the Iran Sanctions Act was in place, US Congress approved another act in September 2006 under which money was spent in support of groups opposed to the Iranian government. Washington even imposed restrictions on scientific cooperation with the Islamic Republic. In February 2004, the US Department of the Treasury ruled against editing or publishing scientific manuscripts from Iran. The ruling also stated that US scientists collaborating with Iranians could be prosecuted. The US hostile measures have escalated in recent years amid a standoff with Iran over its nuclear program. In addition to the oil industry, Iran's banking system was targeted as well. Because Iran is not allowed to use international mechanism to pay foreign companies, it's been facing shortages of drugs for the treatment of serious illnesses such as cancer. This has put tens of thousands of patients in a life-threatening situation. Washington has also pressured European states and the UN Security Council to impose their own sanctions against Iran over the nuclear issue. The US has even acted to enhance the sanctions while it and other members of the P5+1 group of countries engaged in talks with Iran to resolve the nuclear dispute. Iranian authorities have time and again called the sanctions illegal and unlawful. They also denounced the sanctions as inhumane because they have affected the lives of ordinary Iranians, contrary to the US claims that the measures are aimed at the Iranian government.
Americans celebrate the 4th of July, their Independence Day. Just a day before the American holiday in 1988, a United States warship shot down an Iranian passenger plane in the Persian Gulf. Iran mourns the 3rd of July as a day hundreds of its nationals, including children, were murdered by the U.S.
The U.S. brought on one of the deadliest disasters in aviation history by shooting down an Iranian passenger plane in 1988. Iran Air Flight 655 was a civilian passenger flight en route from Tehran to Dubai. It was on its usual flight path on July 3rd when it was shot down by the United States Navy guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes. The incident took place in Iranian airspace over the country's territorial waters in the Persian Gulf. Vincennes destroyed the Iranian Airbus A300 by firing 2 surface-to-air missiles. One of the missiles hit the airliner, which exploded and fell in fragments into the water. All 290 people on board lost their lives, including 66 children. Nearly 3 decades on, the tragedy still has the highest death toll of any aviation incident in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. government worked hard to justify the event. Washington claimed that the crew of Vincennes incorrectly identified the Iranian airliner as attacking F-14 fighter aircraft. The then U.S. Vice President George H.W. Bush in the Reagan administration defended the tragedy as a wartime incident and said American crew had acted appropriately to the situation. However, Vincennes' own Aegis combat system recorded that radio transmitter of the Iranian airliner was squawking on the civilian code only. It also recorded that at the time of the incident, the Iranian aircraft was climbing, not descending, as in an attack run. The Iranian government rejected the U.S. claims that the incident was an accident. Tehran said the attack amounted to international crime, was an atrocity, and a massacre. Iran said the U.S. cruiser negligently shot down the civilian aircraft. It also said the U.S. did not have the right to shoot down the airliner as it was flying within Iranian airspace and did not follow a path that was considered an attack profile. The U.S. only expressed regret over the attack. In February 1996, Washington agreed to pay more than $61 million in settlement to discontinue a case brought by Tehran in the International Court of Justice. The U.S. maintained that the compensation was not a legal duty and was only based on an ex gratia. Nearly 3 decades on, the United States has remained defiant to acknowledge any wrongdoing and never apologized to Iran over the attack that took so many civilian lives, including that of Iranian children. The U.S. even awarded the men of the Vincennes, with Captain William Rogers awarded for his meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding service as commanding officer.
Iran and the United States, which is accompanied by a few other countries, have held several rounds of talks over Tehran's nuclear program. The U.S. says it wants to make sure that Iran does not intend to build atomic weapons. But when will the community of nations make sure that the U.S. will not use its own atomic weapons against other nations again? America is the world's #1 nuclear criminal. You want to know why? Just Google Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thanks for watching, and let's pray for peace in the world. Bye-bye.